On June 6, 1944, one of the most critical operations in all of World War II kicked off. It was officially codenamed Operation Overlord, but history remembers it by a much simpler name: D-Day. So let's dive into how this single, incredibly long day completely changed the course of the war. Just try to wrap your head around that number for a second. In just 24 hours, 156,000 Allied troops, that's Americans, Brits, and Canadians, hit the beaches of Normandy. We're talking about an invasion force on a scale that is just almost impossible to imagine. And that really says it all, doesn't it? This wasn't just some other battle. It was an enormous, high-stakes gamble. The whole point was to smash a hole in what Hitler called Fortress Europe and kick off the final, brutal push to Berlin. Okay, so how did we even get to this point? To really get why this invasion had to happen, you've got to look at the situation in Europe at the time, which made a move this desperate absolutely essential. Think about it. By 1940, Nazi Germany had completely taken over France. The tide really only started to turn when the Soviet Union and the United States got into the fight, but the Eastern Front was just a horrific meat grinder, and Stalin was practically begging his allies to open up a second front in the West. So finally, at the Tehran Conference in '43, the Big Three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin made it official. A massive invasion across the English Channel was a go. You have to understand, this wasn't just a military plan. It was a promise to an entire continent that was suffering under occupation. The Allied leaders were completely determined, and the wheels were officially in motion for the biggest invasion the world had ever seen. Now, planning an invasion this massive is one thing. But keeping it a secret, that's a whole other level of challenge. The success of the entire operation depended on unbelievable amounts of prep work, and, maybe even more importantly, some serious deception. And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? The Germans weren't stupid. They knew an Allied invasion of France was coming eventually. Their whole defensive strategy, the Atlantic Wall, a 2,400-mile-long line of bunkers and guns, was built for exactly that. So how on earth did the Allies manage to surprise them? Well, the answer had one of the best code names in history: Operation Bodyguard. And look, this wasn't some small little trick. It was a huge, complex campaign of misinformation. Its one and only goal was to fool the German high command into thinking the main attack was happening somewhere else, at some other time. And here's exactly how they pulled it off. On one side, you've got the Allied deception. A completely fake army group led by the famous General Patton, complete with inflatable tanks and fake radio chatter, all aimed at the Pas de Calais. And on the other side, the Germans bought it, hook, line, and sinker. They put their best troops and defenses there, which left the real target, Normandy, much more vulnerable. So while this incredible ghost army was doing its thing, the real buildup was happening. By June of 1944, pretty much the entire south of England had been turned into one giant military base. We're talking over 2 million American and Canadian soldiers joining their British allies. The sheer amount of people and equipment was something the world had never seen before. All that planning, all that deception, all that preparation, it all led to this single monumental moment. So now we get to the landings themselves and the story of the longest day. And you know what's crazy? The entire operation almost didn't happen at all. A huge storm rolled into the English Channel, forcing them to delay everything by 24 hours. It was only because the chief meteorologist promised a very brief window of good weather that the Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower, made that legendary call. Okay, let's go. So the invasion force hit 5 different beaches, and as you can see here, the experience on each one was dramatically different. At Utah Beach, the Americans got ashore with pretty light casualties. It was a similar story for the British at Gold and Sword beaches. But just a few miles down the coast at Omaha Beach for the Americans and Juneau Beach for the Canadians, well, it was a whole different kind of hell. That number is just brutal. Over 2,000. Omaha was the most heavily defended beach, and the American troops ran straight into a wall of machine gun fire. They took all those casualties on just that one stretch of sand, a terrible, terrible price for a vital piece of ground. Yeah, this chart really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? You can see the Canadians at Juneau also took a real beating, but the losses at Omaha, they were just in a league of their own. It's no wonder it got the nickname Bloody Omaha. So when you add it all up, the cost of that first 24 hours was just immense.
At least 10,000 Allied casualties, and over 4,000 of them were killed. The foothold they gained was fragile, and it was paid for in blood, but it was the critical turning point. This was the start of the road to victory.
You see, the landings on D-Day weren't the end of the war, not by a long shot, but you better believe they were the beginning of the end. So in this last section, let's trace that path from the beaches of Normandy all the way to VE Day. Once they had that foothold, the momentum was just unstoppable. In less than a week, all 5 beaches were linked up into one solid front. They captured key ports, which let them pour an endless stream of supplies and reinforcements into France. And by the end of August, Allied troops fighting alongside the French resistance were marching into a liberated Paris. And from that point on, things started moving really fast. Once France was free, the final push into Germany began. And think about this. Less than a year after the first boots hit the sand in Normandy, the Nazi regime just completely collapsed. Hitler was dead, Germany surrendered, and victory in Europe was declared. And that really brings us to the final thought here. D-Day was an incredible triumph of planning, of courage, and of unbelievable sacrifice. It led directly to the end of the war in Europe. But here's the thing. Its success was never a sure thing. It all hung on a knife's edge, on deception, on the weather, and on the guts of the guys on those beaches. It really makes you wonder, what would our world look like today if the longest day had gone the other way?